Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the IAB Australian webinar in a slightly different format. So normally you're tuning in about 11 o'clock of the morning, but we've got a really special session today, a lunch and learn with a chance to sort of get under the hood, behind the curtains of a project from woe to go. So I'm really excited about this one. Today we're going to look at the quite amazing feat of delivering the Olympics to the Australian audience, to brands, opportunities for brands in Tokyo for both the Olympics and the Paralympics. And we're really lucky that the Channel 7 team, Twitter, Adgile have all come together to especially pull together a complete picture of this big, amazing exercise that I'm sure you're all both involved with and viewers in different formats. We've got a range of speakers that you can see up on screen there. We've got a lot of amazing content to get through. We're hoping that we do get time for questions at the end, so please feel free to pop questions in the Q&A box. If we get an overflow or we run out of time, we will get round to those in a separate exercise. So please feel free to put them in and we will get round to them at some point. To kick things off, we have the fabulous Nicole Bence, who not only is the network digital sales director for Seven. I'm lucky enough to work with Nick very closely as the IAB chair. So dual hat today, but probably leaning towards her Seven role today. Nick, do you want to take it away?
Thank you, Gai. Firstly, just wanted to say thanks, guys. Very excited to be here today. For everyone who is on the panel today, this was something that we lived and breathed and had to actually for a whole extra year, which was awesome. And you're going to hear a little bit today just around what that actually meant for us as a business. But I suppose I just wanted to kick off and really just talk a little bit about what the Olympics means to us at Seven West Media. It is it's something we hold very near and dear to our heart. We're very proud of, having the broadcast rights for the Olympics. It's something that we've held for a really long time. I think in the last 2 decades, there's only been one Olympics that has not been broadcast by Seven. So you can see the commitment and the dedication, for us as a business to bring that to our audiences, but also to our advertising partners. And I think, Tokyo 2020 for us as a business, it was a bit of a game changer. I think we definitely saw an opportunity for us to really develop and invest into 7 Plus and the digital assets, that surround 7 Plus. We knew that the audience was going to be there this year, and it really gave us, an opportunity to leverage the amazing talent that you've got on this panel today. It was also huge for us from a data perspective. So we'll go into that a little bit later, but, for us, we really saw this as an opportunity to be able to connect and identify with millions and millions of Australians that hadn't potentially, engaged with the 7 Plus platform before. So, that was a massive opportunity for us. I think, for our audiences, I personally have never felt so proud as I did during the Olympics working for Seven. I think, what we brought to the audiences around personalisation, around choice, you could absolutely pick and choose your Olympics your way. You could consume, a myriad of different sports across the day. And that was really all at your fingertips to be able to do that. I think also just the sentiment, right? Like there's not one person that I spoke to that was, negative about the Olympics once they kicked off. There was a little bit of negative chat beforehand, but definitely once it kicked off, I think everyone was just so proud to be an Australian and, watching their favourite athletes. But it really just came at such a great time, I think, to lift sort of the sentiment of the nation. And obviously for our advertising partners, I think, the opportunity to tap into premium context at scale, that was undeniable. But I think from a digital perspective, the opportunity to then be able to find the audiences that mattered most to you and use 7 Red IQ to really find them and not have to choose between context or audience, the opportunity to sort of really bring that together, I think, was phenomenal for our partners. And we definitely saw a lot of them leverage that. So that's the intro. I am now going to hand over to Will Everitt, who is the Director of Product Solutions and is responsible for the teams that brought you the digital experience across 7 Plus.
Thanks very much, Nick, for that intro. So basically, what I want to start with is some of our kind of top level ambitions were in terms of the games. So really our strategic pillars were across the most engaged games ever, the highest audience, the biggest member opportunity, obviously the most profitable, but really showcasing the BVOD product. So with that extra 12 months, what that eventuated in, we targeted a few points. So evolution experience, so really bringing the feature set and the new experience to town. Really ensuring from a distribution perspective that we were everywhere where it mattered. So making sure we had apps in all the right places. As mentioned, sign in, we got a couple of mil plus. So we dramatically rolled out sign in before we got to the Olympics as well. Now, we also, scale was a massive thing about the Olympics. So stability, resilience, and scale was important to us. But we also wanted that platform innovation. So a couple of examples of that, because we wanted to make it the most accessible Olympics, we used AI technology to have multi-language captions, so real-time translation across the games. In addition to that, to really leverage those VOD replay assets, we introduced kind of 24/7 replay sports specific channels. And the tech we were using there, we were first in APAC and third globally, but it dramatically reduced. So it was like 5% of the traditional cost of play out. So that was key to us. It was obviously a short road to the Tokyo. We did have that extra time, but within that kind of 6 to 9 months, we compacted an awful lot. You can see these work streams and how much work we had to do within that short space of time. Essentially, how we achieved that is taking a very much a customer-centric agile delivery approach. We're really focused on not only what we could build for the games, but what we could reuse for the future benefit of 7+. And obviously there's the winters in February, so we wanted to make the most out of that as well. We also really saw this as an opportunity that we had to take the whole business on that journey. So we were showcasing everything. So from the start, from concept, from designs to prototypes, taking everyone on that journey and driving those teams in correlation. So the product we were going to take to market in July 2020 was this. After the postponement, we saw a real opportunity to take the product and platform and experience to the next level. We went to market with this dark mode and improved experience. Joe is now going to take us through. So Joe's one of our designers in product solutions. She's now our CTV product manager. So over to you, Joe, to take us through that.
Thanks so much, Will. And I guess, yeah, off the back of this, I'm going to take you all through sort of that 6 months leading into the games this year and sort of that new experience that we ended up going to market with and some of the key features that really drove that new premium experience. Here you can see a few of those items, the first being our top feature. This was something that we sort of quickly rushed out across our web and mobile products right before the games. And it was an awesome thing to promote all of the hugest moments and events throughout the whole Olympics and Paralympics, and was such an easy driver to get users straight into streams. We also revamped our live experience a bit. We did a whole new UI that made it really pop, as well as showing not what was just currently on, but it also showed what was coming up next, so users could really plan their viewing experience. We also did an update to our navigation across our products. This really helped surface the Olympics and make it easier for users to find different sports, as well as working with our short form and VOD content to have that sort of catch-up replay experience as well. That was something we definitely worked on leading into the games. Another thing that the UX team spent a lot of time on, which was really a big part of the whole user experience, was actually the asset design. This was where we worked really closely with the entire company's kind of branding, where we wanted to align with what was happening in marketing and, you know, on broadcast. But it was also a key player in making sure all the content popped on our different devices and made it easier for users to find and discover the Olympics content. But before we even got into the actual games, there was a whole sort of lead up process, which sort of was this whole onboarding, teaching our users, you know, what was going to happen during the games, and onboarding them onto the platform where they could, you know, add sports to their watch list, also know what the experience was going to be like during the games. And this was definitely a key driver into getting all those users in during the actual games. We also had to work really closely with a lot of our partners to make sure that sort of marketing and user flow was seamless, from, you know, discovering the app, getting it from the App Store, and into getting users into those streams. And then the sort of user experience, you know, throughout the whole games across the whole company was really something that we engaged in. And it was that sort of end-to-end flow of a user. You know, it was from the amazing commentary of Bruce McAvaney to having, you know, our cameramen in Tokyo capturing those moments, to those linear as well as, you know, streaming experiences on broadcast and on digital. And it really became this sort of infinity loop for the company of this seamless experience that users had throughout the Olympics and Paralympics. And so the end result was we created this really premium product that was easy to navigate and find, you know, all the content that people wanted to watch throughout the games. And speaking of that content, I'm going to pass over to Paul Moore, who's going to talk about the content strategy. So thank you, Paul.
Hey everybody, yes, and I'm now going to try and take control of the screen as well, so apologies if I get this wrong. So really our goal for this was simple, and actually I can't take control of the screen at the moment, apologies. We were looking to create the richest user experience that we could make for the Olympics. So we wanted to deliver 45 live channels. I don't know if anyone can help me just get control of the screen over, or if someone can just flick through the slides for me, because I can't currently do it, sorry. So we were hoping to create the richest Olympics experience Australia's ever seen, and that from a content point of view is a great opportunity to have. So we took 45 channels of live Olympic sports content. We supplemented that was at peak. So that was made up of 2 broadcast channels, 35 sports channels, 6 host broadcast channels, which are curated by the Olympics themselves, an Olympic news channel, and also an Olympic features channel. And we added all of that together with short, mid and long form VOD. Now we arrived at that offering through a variety of qualitative and quantitative analysis. We looked at the data. We've been lucky enough to have some very large multi-sport events prior to this. So the Winter Olympics, Commonwealth Games, Rio. So we looked at the data from those events. We also looked at what the user might want to be viewing, and we knew that, you know, Australians are a patriotic bunch. They wanted to watch the Aussies in action. They also wanted to have their choice. They wanted to pick their own adventure through the Olympics, and we thought by offering such a breadth of content and supplementing that with obviously the fantastic broadcast channels which choose the best of the Olympics, people really could have the best of all the richest Olympic experience Australia had ever seen. Live was the key to all of this for us. I'm not going to lie, that's where the bulk of the minutes came from, and that's where we really focused our strongest attention. So we had the broadcast channels, which as I said, created the best of the Olympics for us. The 35 sports channels allowed us to focus on every single event. So that allowed us to offer multiple streams from most of the sports available to us. And then obviously we had the additional channels that flowed from there. On top of that, VOD came next. And VOD, even though it was a smaller percentage of the minutes available to us, it was a really essential piece of what we were doing. And we were aware of that. There's only so much that people can watch at an event like the Olympics. And we wanted to make sure we gave them the opportunity to catch up on anything they missed. So obviously, We offered up long form replays of most of the big sessions and every single medal session, and we aimed for every single Australian session. And we offered short form replays, and there were 60 to 80 short form replays going up every day on 7+. On top of that, we also built out our Olympic minis offering, which was extended highlights from the games. So we say 6 to 8 per day. The reality was at peak, we were offering about 15 to 20. And we really focused on the big events. So, you know, we were looking at the Aussies, we were looking at the medals, we were trying to make sure we gave people exactly what we wanted to give them. And this was really the key for us, is to look at what the user wanted. We used, as I said, qualitative and quantitative analysis to get there. And we used ongoing data analysis to get there as well. And we looked at the audience appetite, we looked at the breadth of interest, and we looked at the volume of consumption, and then we built our offering from there. We also, and it's to take nothing away from social, this was obviously focusing primarily on 7+. Social was an essential part of everything we did. It was massive from a content marketing point of view, but also from a commercial point of view. And we worked across all of the social platforms for that. If you could flip the next slide, thank you. To help us to create the content offering, what we did is we broke the sports into gold, silver, and bronze. This allowed us to really showcase internally what we were going to do with each of the different sports. Now, they weren't fixed categories. Sports moved around. We were constantly analysing the data, and I'll come to that in a second. But sports moved between categories. So a gold sport, if it wasn't performing well, we'd scale back how much we were doing. A bronze sport, if it was performing fantastically, we would get moved up. And this would allow us to then structure our social content, our VOD content, and obviously where we were putting the marketing and promotion and trying to get the eyeballs onto. So it was a really important strategy for us to make sure the business knew how we were attacking each sport, and also it enabled us from a content team point of view to really build out our coverage and our offering to those for those various different sports. All the way through, data analysis was key to us. In the lead up to the games, we looked at our data and we worked out what people were watching. We knew from previous Olympics that they were watching everything. So, you know, from my instance, for instance, through the games, I was fascinated and quite surprised at how popular volleyball was. And literally every day, a lot of people were watching a lot of volleyball, which we hadn't expected. And equally, golf was one of our highest performing sports during the games. You know, we were looking at the numbers, the dashboards from day to day. You've got some there, and it's probably worth mentioning at this point, this wasn't a normal Olympics for us. Usually we like to have everybody in one place, but thanks to COVID, that wasn't possible. We were split across 5 different locations. So this was a dashboard setup that I never got to see personally. But these dashboards were open as soon as I got into the office until the moment I left. And we were constantly looking at the numbers. We were looking at what people were watching live. We were looking at what they were watching on VOD. And we were just trying to tailor our content offering to really give them the best of that, to elevate the channels that were performing really well, to focus our VOD offering on the content that people were watching and consuming more and more and more of. And it was a really interesting process for us. It was a really important process for us, and it was one that actually really shaped the Olympic experience across 7+. And then, of course, at the end, social. Now, as I said, you can't. There's one slide on social because I know Wills is about to talk to it more, but it was a hugely important part of everything we did. We were across all of the essential social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. TikTok, we launched a new channel effectively straight for the Olympics, and it received exponential growth through the games. We attached each channel differently, so we had a separate team working on TikTok and Instagram from Facebook and Twitter. We tailored our content to those channels to make sure we were really giving ourselves the best opportunity on each to realize success. Twitter for us was a hugely important part of what we did, and it was a really essential piece. We created some ancillary programming for Twitter, which allowed us to really talk around the games, armchair experts, and I think Wills is going to talk to that in a minute. But it gave us the opportunity to really set the agenda and the tone for what the Olympics was and how we were representing it. And we wanted to be a really positive, fast-paced, in-depth environment for the Olympics. And that's exactly what we produced via Twitter, to really bring out the best of the games and allow people to engage with it. So I'm going to hand over to Wills, who can talk more to this and how we help to elevate our content offering via Twitter.
Sorry, guys, I'm just getting there with the remote control. All right, hopefully we're good to go. Yeah, look, a big thank you, Paul. Again, congrats again on just incredible coverage right across the Olympics and Paralympics. I know we're extremely grateful for the opportunity. Look, when we first sat down with Seven over 2 years ago now, with the commercial teams and strategy teams, we knew at the time we were seeing a big shift in video viewing habits. We also saw that Beaver was starting to ramp up. The second screen strategies were coming in on every brief. And we also started to see a big spike and high amounts of growth in terms of viewers coming to Twitter around these live cultural moments. So whether that was a World Cup, an AFL Grand Final, or in this case, the Olympics, which we're diving into today, we weren't just seeing more users come to Twitter around these live moments, but they were spending longer on the platform as well. Okay, doesn't seem to be clicking. Here we go, great. We also work really closely with Seven to really dive a bit deeper into audience behavior and data and consumption habits around these live moments. And we obviously looked at previous events like the Rio Olympics, we looked at Pyeongchang, the Winter Olympics, and what we found were Olympic fans on Twitter are actually a lot younger than Olympic fans in general. We also learned that the Twitter users were almost 2.5 times more likely to watch the Olympics online. Now, when we combine this type of data and insights with the introduction of a heap of sports skewing those younger audiences this year across the games, like the skateboarding, like the surfing and speed climbing, we saw this huge opportunity for Seven to really tap into those younger audiences and connect with those harder to reach audiences across the games. So how do we compare to other markets? And if we sort of dive into some of the live streams, and just to give you some context here, we often look at Canada when we look at comparing audiences to the market that is Australia. The reason being is the Canadian audience have very similar consumption habits and passion points across that market. But more importantly, we have very similar user numbers and audience penetration in the Canadian market. So to see these results from the 128 live streams that we ran from the Seven Olympics Twitter account, 10 times the amount of viewers compared to that major TV network in Canada, it just blew us away. And I think in terms of the reasons behind these really, really strong numbers, and Paul sort of touched on this earlier, it was taking in these, daily insights and this ongoing data analysis that weren't necessarily focusing on the tentpole events like the swimming or the athletics. It was finding the little pockets of, these leaned in viewers that we saw coming from the more obscure sports like, volleyball, as Paul mentioned, or golf or the skateboarding. So just really incredible to see these really strong numbers across the live streams. It was also great to see the Armchair Experts brand really continue to evolve across the Olympic period. We've seen such great success with Armchair Experts across the live AFL and live NFL shows, but with the introduction of the amazing Georgie Parker, really broadened that audience. And we saw users, really flocking to Twitter every day or every afternoon to really catch up on, a real solid wrap up of the day's events, but also, really engaged in sort of previewing what was to lie ahead across the rest of the games period. And again, over 1 million incremental viewers across those 16 live shows. And then, look, I thought it was just interesting just to show another particular format that we ran across the games period to really help support Seven and drive that tune in to Seven Olympics content. This is what we call our tweet to subscribe activation. And it simply asks users to opt in to an initial tweet. As you can see, they're on the first phone. And they opt in by simply retweeting the tweet or liking the tweet. Once they opt in and engage with that initial tweet, they're sent a thank you message, basically saying to them, we'll remind you when it might be Jess Fox competing in her final, it might be the start of the opening ceremony, to really drive those users all via a push notification to take them directly to a specific moment throughout the Olympic Games. So a campaign that ran really well to really drive that extra tune in. All right, so what did we learn? 4 pillars here. The first, I think we all agree, it was probably the most emotional games that we've ever seen. I was going through a box of tissues a night. And Seven did such an amazing job with really tapping into those emotional moments, the Aussie medal moments, the road to Tokyo behind the scenes interviews that we love to see. And Seven just didn't broadcast on Twitter. They really used all of our formats, especially live, to really build that deeper engagement and conversation. They also recognize that timeliness matters. So to really understand when it's appropriate to actually join a conversation and to do that in such an authentic way was really a key takeaway. And then finally, I think my personal takeaway and learning from the games was just having that ability to listen for feedback. And Seven did this in a really great way on Twitter, through Twitter polls, really asking for feedback. And when you can put the user in control and they can sort of feel like they're choosing the type of content that they can view in the future, it's when we really start to see great results. And then finally, the Seven team sort of asked to sort of just have a quick snapshot on how we see the future of live panning out. We're already having some really exciting discussions around, obviously, the Winter Olympics. But here's just a great example of, again, a major broadcaster like the NBA listening for feedback, right? They're using Twitter polls where you can see on the first phone there, throughout the NBA All-Star game, they asked users to pick which particular player they could follow via a live camera angle all throughout the second half of the All-Star game. And I think as the poll was run, I think LeBron James took out the winning vote. So right throughout that second half of the All-Star game, viewers had the chance to follow LeBron through a live ISO cam on ground at that particular game. So it kind of gives you that kind of choose your own adventure kind of look and feel to how we see live panning out in the future. But again, thanks for the time, and yeah, just an incredible event to work across.
You're on mute, Phil.
Thanks for that, Nick. One of us was going to do it. Thanks for the heads up there. Was just saying thank you very much for the handover there, Wills, and brilliant to see some of those results from a swim and Twitter perspective and a bit of a look into the future in terms of what we can expect from a live sport perspective. So yeah, thank you. I'm Phil Hammond, and I'm the head of data partnerships at Adgile. So firstly, just quickly picking up from my colleague Craig Service's keynote at the future of TV advertising Sydney earlier this year, for those that were able to attend either physically or virtually. We at Adgile are working with the industry to fuel the future of total TV, which obviously includes the now. And we're looking at it from a performance management and effectiveness perspective. So we were engaged by Swim to observe, to measure, and understand the extent of which live sport is an effective marketing platform from a performance perspective, over and above the brand business outcomes that it drives. So enabling Swim, their Olympics and Paralympics partners and sponsors to understand the relative response rate of their assets in combination or in isolation across both broadcast, linear TV and VOD. So across the next few minutes, I'll take the opportunity to touch on the observed emerging trends, key insights, and the role of VOD with respect to bringing the 7+ audiences through that funnel. So before I do that, I'll take the opportunity to go through sort of how we integrated and what that meant in terms of what was required to bring this to life. So with that in mind, what we firstly did was we needed to integrate in twofold. So we needed to integrate from a SWIMS ad server perspective. So how we did that was we applied a beacon at a creative level, working with SWIMS ad ops team. What we were then able to do is ensure that we could capture all of the impressions across desktop, smartphone, tablet, and connected TV. So while that was so important was because on top of that, what we needed to do was integrate at a brand's level. So we worked with SWIMS partners and sponsors to embed an Adgile pixel, enabling us to capture the website data and therefore analyze it and attribute back to paid media exposure across 7+. So with data governance at the heart of our solution, naturally, we were then able to slice and dice the responses and response rates by line item, creative, live versus VOD, platform, ad unit, time of day, day of week, etc. So a rich level of sort of slicing and dicing capabilities that was afforded to us. So let's jump to the headlines. And we've chosen a few today to talk to, which we think will resonate with the audience in terms of the performance that 7+ did deliver through the Olympics for their Olympics partners and Paralympics partners and sponsors. So starting with connected TV and smartphone better together, ultimately what we were able to observe was greater than 40% of total responses were driven from connected TV exposure. And that equated to greater than 55% of total responses from a second screen perspective coming from smartphone. So what that sort of equates to is we've observed consistently across the brands and sponsors that connected TV from a content and user experience perspective has resonated with those 7+ audiences. It's essentially equal to high engaged, non-distracted audience from a dual screening perspective. The second item, which we'll talk to today, is from our observations, is the increased frequency required to drive that first session. So what I mean when I say that is of the observed number of exposures before that first session, we saw that greater than 50%, or an increase of greater than 50% more than the average number of exposures delivered were required across the Tokyo 2020 campaigns to drive that first outcome. So bringing that to life in a little bit more detail, for a particular brand where we observed an average number of exposures or frequency of 3.1, 4.7 exposures or frequency was the observed average number of exposures to drive that first website visit. So an opportunity exists there to further test and learn from a greater frequency perspective in order to drive even more website visits off the back of that paid media exposure. So in addition, we've been working and analysing the most common and efficient impression exposure paths, and that's from the various Adgile captured dimensions perspectives. So understanding the role of creative combination, mix, rotation, and that's an input into sequential marketing optimizations that come from that. But ultimately, the impressions that were driven were significant in terms of the responses, and there's an opportunity to continue to test and learn with the optimal frequency. The final point which we'll talk to today is just the sheer volume of website visits that were driven by direct to website. And where I'm comparing that to is direct to website versus search. We observed the dominant website consumer journey to occur from that direct to website perspective. So whilst direct was the dominant source, we still observed greater than 40% of the resulting website visits via search to website. So what that means is VOD drives the lion's share of website visitation direct to the website. However, there's still that significant sort of work that VOD in this instance is performing in terms of getting consumers through search into the website itself. So now that we have all of these baselines and the strength of VOD from a live performance perspective at a brand by brand and category level, we can continue to work with SWIM, their partners and sponsors, and their agencies, of course, to understand now the moving of the dials based on the explicit VOD performance that we're capturing here and what we've touched on here today, but also with respect to developing further in-flight capabilities and optimization opportunities. So that's taking from website visits through to e-com and return on advertising spend outcomes. So I appreciate the opportunity to take you through these these observed headlines with you today. Having run that third band there, Nick, I'm going to pass the baton on to you and give you an opportunity to talk to some of the big numbers that 7+ delivered from both that Olympics and Paralympics perspective. So appreciate it.
Thank you, Phil. I'm going to see if I can do seamless tech transition for everyone. Look at that. So I'm not going to read out everything on this slide. I'll leave you guys to do that, but safe to say that the coverage of the Olympics and the Paralympics absolutely blew us away. I think, you know, coming into it with both Sydney and Melbourne still in lockdown and, you know, a number of those sort of macro circumstances, we knew the numbers were going to be big. But even we, I think, were a little bit surprised at just how big it went. So, you know, we had just over 9 million people come into 7+ during that period. We had a significant amount of new users coming in. As I said earlier, it really introduced the 7+ brand, you know, to a number of new Australians. And we could, you know, we could see a lot of data around them. We could see why they, you know, what they came in on, what their affinities were. We collected a huge amount of identity throughout that period. So we're now just sitting just over 10 million identified, and, you know, the Olympics was a huge contributor to that number. I think also what was really interesting is the exclusive watching on 7+. So, you know, as Paul talked to earlier, between broadcast, we were pushing a lot of users to 7+. So people who were consuming on broadcast were then, you know, switching out to 7+ because they wanted to delve into their favourite sport, and that wasn't being covered at that time. It really was about driving that user experience. But then we did see 2.6 million people come into 7+ that didn't consume on broadcast. So, you know, huge numbers. You know, the stability of the platform throughout that period was exceptional. And, you know, I do take my hats off to Will and the team to be able to drive that. The next was just really around some comparisons. So you know, Fiona in our team actually found these stats, and I thought they were really interesting when you look at the consumption of the Olympics versus some of the other regions. So obviously we were in a great time zone. It made it really friendly watching. I think all of us probably sat in a Zoom or a Teams meeting during that period where someone all of a sudden just like shouted out because an Aussie had won a gold and they had it playing in the background. So, you know, definitely sort of showed to the fandom around sports and the commitment from Australians. But when you actually look at it to some of the other regions, we saw on average, I think Europe was just under 15 minutes. The US was just under 20, but averaging 15 to 20 minutes per person. Compare that to Australia, and that was 3 hours. So huge consumption, really goes to show, as we said, the environment that sport is and the opportunity for brands to be able to connect with Australians and obviously the mindset that delivers. I think the things that we also saw was just the accessibility. So the amount of partners that we had that were really just supporting the downloading. So I'm not sure if anyone downloaded the app during that period, but you saw that the App Store for Apple and Google were really sort of pushing that. You know, I've got Apple TV here at home, and pretty much every time you'd log on, you know, they were really pushing the downloading of the app. So we really saw the industry get behind, you know, the positivity and the sentiment of the Olympics and really helping us to sort of drive that consumption. I think it's no surprise that from a commercial perspective and also from an audience perspective, we saw a huge desire to want to get behind, you know, the golden moments. And again, as Paul sort of alluded to before, it was really interesting to see some of those sports that came out that you wouldn't necessarily think would be picked up. I know that someone in our team was a massive fan of the sports climbing, and, you know, she was always in the team chat going, did anyone see that? And I think what was really interesting is that you would then see these certain sports really pick up consumption from a VOD perspective. So whether that was to the partnership with Twitter and something will have happened and that conversation was happening there, or whether it was, you know, just in everyday sort of water cooler social conversation. But the amount of people that were coming back post a live event to then catch up and relive that moment that, you know, that everyone was sort of talking to, I think, you know, it was really interesting to see that as well. And probably just for me, second last slide, guys, but just talking to, as I said, you know, partners commercially really wanting to go after those golden moments. And what was really interesting for us is that, you know, the two main channels that were coming from broadcast, we necessarily didn't know exactly when those moments were happening. And, you know, the way that we tag content up and we then deliver that experience into broadcast, into 7+, I should say, from broadcast, meant that it wasn't as easy as us being able to say, okay, we think a golden moment is going to happen on day 4 between 10:12 and 10:14 a.m. Target that moment. So, you know, we really have to work quite strategically in order to be able to deliver those, you know, those golden moments to clients. And what we did see was, you know, a big sort of a big increase in our addressability, you know, during the Olympics as well. So, you know, the amount of lines that the guys were working with around targeted moments, like, it was insane. It was a full control room. I think the other part that we saw, as everyone would probably imagine, is that a lot of that revenue was guaranteed. So it was booked in previously, whether it was through IO, you know, or programmatic guaranteed bookings. We did see a huge proportion of brands really leaning into, you know, wanting to reserve their inventory. But we also then saw a huge increase in the non-guaranteed programmatic requests. And that was really driven just by the sheer volume of consumption, the number of devices and minutes that were being consumed. So again, you know, that was like a 6 times increase on what we would normally see day to day coming through. And our SSP partners, you know, absolutely supported us in that. And I think it was really interesting to see the change in behaviour at a desk level as well. So from the trading desks, you know, live sport is definitely alive and well. And I think that's something, you know, as an industry, we've really been working on over the last sort of 12 to 18 months, as we've seen more consumption move to digital and we've seen more rights move to digital as well, how we enable our brand partners to really capitalise on that, but still with the flexibility of non-guaranteed. And I think that was a big shift that we saw, you know, happen throughout the Olympics. And just the last point that, you know, that I was going to talk to here was really around thinking about our user experience. So under Paul's amazing direction, we had a whole team of mid-roll operators sitting down, you know, in the control centre, watching all of those additional channels. So broadcast, obviously there was a break inserted and we would pick that up and then, you know, dynamically serve the ads. However, on all of those other digital channels, we had to create those ad breaks. So really tapping into the individual sports and where those natural breaks were happening, whether it's, you know, after a goal, et cetera, et cetera. And that was really a focus for us to be able to deliver a better user experience. You know, a few days in, we saw that the consumption was going to be absolutely huge and we actually reduced our ad breaks. So, you know, we talk a lot about enhancing the advertiser and viewer experience at Seven, and that was a strategy that we picked up very quickly and moved with to ensure that we were delivering, you know, the best experience that we could, you know, for our audiences. And probably just the last thing that I wanted to tap into, because again, you know, when you talk about pride, I think the Paralympics was just such an amazing event. Whilst we didn't see the same numbers that we did see, you know, for the Olympics, the Paralympics did sort of reach about 7.5 million Australians. We saw huge consumption of that across, you know, 7+. And this really was, you know, the highest numbers ever that we've sort of seen for a Paralympic. So I think to see, you know, the coverage, the awareness that we're able to bring to these athletes and to these sports and to their amazing stories. And we really saw Australia step up with sort of increased engagement. And I think for any of you who saw, you know, we were running a campaign at the time around really sort of pushing to have the payments equal for the Paralympians as well as the Olympian, you know, medalists. And I think, you know, to be a part of a big sort of cultural evolution like that and being able to sort of use our channels and use our platforms to really garner, you know, that interest and that commitment from the Australian public to really drive an initiative forward like that, you know, is definitely something that we are all really proud of. So that's it from us, guys. I just want to take the opportunity to thank the team for everyone who sort of pulled this together. But I think, Gai, we'll hand over to you for questions.
Thanks so much, Nick. We might bring everyone back in because that was amazing. Thanks for sharing that. I know the Olympics got me through the weirdness of this year, and badminton and table tennis were my pleasure projects to watch and keep up to date with. there's a lot there, and I'm sure we'll have a million questions come through afterwards, because it's an amazing feat that you carried off. A couple of questions from me that sort of feed off some of the ones that are coming through from the audience. And this is probably maybe for Phil and Nick combined, one or the other. For the global advertisers who are sponsoring across multiple markets, are they starting to pull together, you know, a true picture of their campaign effectiveness across different markets? Are we seeing that sort of collaboration yet? Too early?
I don't think so. I mean, you know, Phil, you jump in, but I think what was really interesting is if I sort of think about the digital journey, I feel like the effectiveness is the latest in we want it, we want it, we want it. But often inside a client, you know, when you're talking about tagging up websites and you're talking about, you know, you're typically talking about the marketing team and the tech team, you know, that's a lot of stakeholders to get across the line. You're talking about privacy and compliance, and all those sorts of things crop up that people start to feel really nervous about. And so I think we're still on that journey with clients of them really wanting to understand what it is that's driving attribution. But in channels where they typically haven't worked that way, it's a journey to take the business on and those teams on to be able to understand the value and de-risk it for them and just make them feel really comfortable. So I think that next stage of then how you align those teams, I think still to come, Gai, would be my perspective.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm sure it's an opportunity for Phil and Adgile to look at some of those. I mean, some of that information around frequency for awareness and then driving to action is really interesting to see how that performs, not just across devices, but across markets as well.
Yeah, 100% there, Gai. And just to echo sort of Nick's point there, as you say, there are some sort of partners that we'd enjoyed prior to the Olympics as well that were able to get involved in the swim partnership as well. So I think as we continue to create some new muscle memory around some of the new metrics that can come out of, say, like connected TV as a performance channel over and above a brand builder, I think, you know, to Nicole's point, there's opportunities to do further test and learn, not just about getting, you know, consumers to a website, but all the way through the funnel. And I think, you know, with respect to e-com outcomes, I think that's probably the next frontier. But, you know, as we all rightfully say, data governance and privacy needs to be at the heart of everything that we do there. So it's ensuring that we, you know, remain on the side of the angels as an industry to deliver that without compromising, you know, integrity of security, of course.
Fantastic. I think this one is for Paul, because I think you had the task of sort of managing that manual team, it sounds like. Live sports, live events are only going to get bigger from a digital point of view. I hear many companies, not just you guys, talking about the pain of doing that, or the difficulty in doing that. How do you think that'll change? So in 3 years or 2 years time, isn't it? 3 years time, the next Olympics, what will be different for you there?
In terms of ad insertion?
Yeah.
Or,
ad insertion.
I think I'll handle some of that probably to Nick, to be honest with you, because I'm very much the fluffy content guy. But I think, look, it's certainly, it's not an easy event to work across. There's very strict protocols around when you can insert ads in sports and how you can do it. And obviously, you, as I said during the presentation, we had up to 35 individual host sports streams going at any one time, plus everything else. So the guys are coordinating a lot at that point. And you know, it's a very difficult thing. There's no break markers within a host stream that you get from the Olympics. So you really are reliant on that manual ad insertion. We created guidebooks and gave plenty of dry run-throughs in advance on when ads can go in various sports. And obviously, again, we were using those dashboards to really target the sports that were delivering the sort of the numbers in, so that we were kind of being strategic with the way we inserted ads on those streams. It was very important for us. But yeah, it's not an easy process. Will it change going into Paris 2024? That's probably a question for Nick, whether she sees any innovations coming up. But certainly from my side, I think there's a while yet before we can go beyond the manual piece for that, because I think you have to be reactive, and sport is something where you don't necessarily know. And obviously with a tennis match you do, but with plenty of sports you don't know when there's going to be a break in play or when there's going to be an opportunity to insert an ad. So you've got to kind of do it on the fly to a point.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't have too much to add to that other than to say, I think, we obviously have to work really closely with the sports rights partners and, what those restrictions are or opportunities are there. I think if anything, we've just seen clients and like strategy teams get more creative in thinking about integration and what those opportunities are. And thinking beyond the ad as well. I think, I mean, if you take something like the AFL, it's quite, you have to insert where you have to insert. So I think it's more of an opportunity to really bring together the creative thinking and starting to think about what those opportunities are, as I said, beyond the ad. And I think that's probably what we will see, particularly in the digital space, moving forward, is what is the experience that we can help a brand bring to the audience that is not disruptive to the viewer experience. It's not disruptive to the content. It's an add-on. It's additional information. It's, I think we're starting to see that with some of the overlays coming through with some of the virtual reality and, some of those sorts of things. You're watching the supercars and you can choose your own view. You can jump into that driver's car. You can see their history. I think we're starting to play with some of those things. I think there's going to be a lot more of that over the next, hopefully 18 to 24 months. And I would definitely say by 2024.
Yeah, don't worry, you don't have to answer that today. You can take a breather after Tokyo. I'm sure it's taken a lot out of you guys. Couple of questions coming through, I guess, around lessons in the CTV side of things. Question coming through from Grant about what did you learn about TV retargeting based on the CTV audience?
Do you want to take that?
Again, Nick?
Me, I know. Yeah, look, I think not so much learnings as far as just reinforced the strategy and the plan that we've been on. I think we've been on a cookieless future for quite some time now. That's the whole 7 Red IQ proposition. The Olympics, as I said earlier, was a huge, component of that in helping us to drive identity. I think everything that we've, really been working on has been about how do we apply all of the smarts and all of the solutions across, connected television. We don't need to go into it now, but there's obviously a lot of restrictions around, CTV versus the web and how you can apply a lot of those data, opportunities and retargeting, et cetera, et cetera. So the opportunity for us to see audiences come in across multiple devices and be able to start to really grow that identity graph has been huge for us. So yeah, it really, as I said, it just reinforced and helped us to continue to sort of accelerate that journey that we're on.
Fantastic. I've got a question for Wheels. And then we'll probably wrap up if there's no more sort of questions coming through. And this is going to sound very Australian, but within the Twitter network, your own, various Twitter sort of countries, did this really stand out? Did it get a lot of attention? Were people sort of jealous of this level of, I guess, cooperation with the broadcaster, but integration, but also audience engagement?
Yeah, great question. And I think, just that stat on, the comparison to the, I can't name the TV network in Canada, but, the fact that we saw such strong results across those live streams, like the stat mentioned, 10 times more than that TV network in the Canadian market is testament just to the exclusive nature of the streams and just the ability to find the right audience. I think Seven did such a great job at nailing that. And for the first time, we didn't have the luxury of this with Rio, but for the first time with Tokyo, we had our own daily global insights coming in every morning, which athlete was trending the most, which events were driving the highest amount of conversation. We were relaying this with Seven, obviously, to Paul's team, and it just was testament to the way that the live streams were delivered. So, yeah, and from an NBC standpoint, they did, in the US, they did run a series of similar polls, sort of asking viewers what type of events they wanted to see next in terms of the live stream. So that was sort of one aspect that NBC used. But in terms of, changing the game and really finding the right audiences on Twitter, Seven are leading the way in that regard.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, take what information you can from out there. It's a smart strategy to look internally and externally.
Exactly. Like every tweet's a signal of, you know, intent or action, or gives us a good indication of who's watching specific content. So,
and I think you talked to it really well, Wills. I know when we sort of caught up and we talked about, you know, the cultural moment happens in the Olympics on, you know, one of the 7 channels, and people want to talk about that. You know, they want to extend that conversation. And I think, you know, that's the role that Twitter plays, you know, for us. And so it's just, you know, it's such a beautiful partnership in that way. And then we're able to get a lens into that conversation and see the sentiment and then bring that back into our ecosystem. So, you know, it's not an either or, it's an and, I think.
Fantastic. Well, I'd like to thank you all, because it's really generous to share this level of information to the whole community, and we're really grateful. Nick and I have been talking about this for a while in terms of how this can really help the whole industry. But it was a really lovely, inspiring one to hear from all of you today on everyone's role and the heavy lift that you all did. So congratulations.
And Beijing
thank you very much.
Beijing to come.
Absolutely. Cool. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for on the call.
thank you so
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.